Hey everyone! Today, we're diving into another terrifying case. Make sure to support my channel by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. Every parent, in an attempt to protect and keep their child safe, tries to explain that trusting strangers can be dangerous. They emphasize that you shouldn't talk to strangers, follow them somewhere, and under no circumstances should you ever get into a stranger's car. Having these conversations is crucial, just like explaining the reasons behind these precautions and the potential consequences of ignoring them. The story of an American high school student named Abigail Hernandez serves as a powerful lesson, illustrating what can happen when you're careless and too trusting of a stranger who, at first glance, seems to offer a helping hand during a tough situation. All Abigail did was hope that a kind guy would give her a ride home. But instead, she ended up in the lair of a real monster. Abigail, or simply Abby, Maria Hernandez was born on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire, along the banks of the Merrimack River. She was the youngest of two daughters, born to Ruben and Zania Hernandez, and grew up with her older sister, Sarah, to whom she was very close. Abby's mom worked as a nurse at a local hospital, while her dad was a sales agent. Overall, the Hernandez family was strong, happy, and pretty well off. But when Abby was in middle school, her parents decided to separate. Not long after the divorce, her father remarried and started a new family, while the daughters from his first marriage continued to live with their mom. Ruben still supported his older children financially, but their relationship dwindled to little more than birthday and Christmas greetings. From a young age, Abby was an active, curious, and social child. She always had a ton of friends, and she constantly shifted between different hobbies and activities, eager to try everything and be everywhere. Abby played sports, was a talented artist, enjoyed photography, read a lot, and studied foreign languages, which she picked up effortlessly. Around the age of 12, Abby became a member of a local outdoor club, regularly going on camping trips, hiking, and falling in love with the mountains. She also became pretty skilled in wilderness survival, putting those lessons to good use on various adventures. It's not surprising, considering New Hampshire's natural beauty, with its forests, mountains, and rivers. It's a paradise for outdoor activities, hiking, and climbing. This is a state that attracts adventurers, thrill seekers, and nature lovers from all over the country. Abigail Hernandez's classmates described her as a brave, smart, friendly, and determined girl, someone who could easily connect with the people around her. She was the kind of person who could jump into a conversation about pretty much any topic, wasn't afraid of challenges, and always spread her optimism to everyone around her. Abigail Hernandez wasn't the kind of girl to sit still. Always on the move, she had big dreams, a bright future, and a spirit full of adventure. The summer of 2013 had been nothing short of incredible for Abby. New places, exciting experiences, and countless stories to share when she returned to school in September. At just 14 years old, Abby had started dating Jimmy, a classmate a year older than her. Her mother, Zania, knew about their relationship and didn't mind. Life seemed perfect until the day Abby vanished. It was early October, just days before Abby's 15th birthday. She had been eagerly planning a hiking trip with her outdoor club. A brand new pair of hiking boots sat by her bed, slightly tight, but she was determined to break them in. On October 9th, Abby went to school like any other day. After class, she planned to take a short walk through a nearby park, but she promised her mom she wouldn't be out too late. That evening, as 5 p.m. came and went, Zania grew concerned. Calls to Abby's phone went straight to voicemail. By nightfall, with no sign of her daughter, worry turned into panic. Desperately, she contacted Abby's friends and teachers. All confirmed the same story. Abby had left school, waved goodbye at the bus stop, and decided to walk home. But she never made it there. Fearing the worst, Zania and her eldest daughter, Sarah, rushed to the police station. A search began immediately. Word of Abby's disappearance spread fast. Flyers with her face flooded the town. Social media exploded with posts about the missing teen. Police scoured parks, abandoned buildings, wooded areas. They checked local rivers and even questioned potential witnesses. Still nothing. Investigators began looking into Abby's life. Did she have enemies? A troubled past? A jealous ex? But Abby was known for her kindness, her friendly personality. No one had any reason to harm her. Naturally, suspicion turned to Jimmy, her boyfriend. Had there been an argument? A secret falling out? But Jimmy was visibly shaken by Abby's disappearance. And he had an airtight alibi. He had spent the entire evening at a family event, backed up by witnesses, security footage, and phone records. With no new leads, the case grew colder. Weeks passed. The once hopeful search efforts faded into quiet heartbreak. Then, nearly 6 weeks after Abby disappeared, Zania found a letter in her mailbox. Her hands trembled as she read it. In shaky handwriting, Abby apologized for leaving. She claimed she was safe, healthy, and didn't want her family to worry. But she couldn't say where she was. At the bottom of the letter was a cryptic phrase. Dreams come true. Handwriting analysis confirmed it was really from Abby. The date on the letter suggested she was still alive. But if she was safe, why wouldn't she come home? Was she afraid? Or was someone forcing her to write it? Speculation ran wild. Had Abby run away? Was she pregnant? Had she left willingly with someone? But her family rejected those theories outright. Abby hadn't taken any money, ID, or personal items. Her best friend, Miranda, was adamant. Abby wouldn't have abandoned her family like this. Something was wrong. The FBI took over the case, now treating it as an abduction. They believed Abby's letter had been written under duress. She was alive, but someone was holding her against her will. And they were right. Abby wasn't far at all. She was just a few dozen miles away, held captive in a house police had already visited more than once. And the man who took her? Nathaniel Kibbe. A name no one knew, yet one that would send shivers down the spines of investigators once they uncovered the truth. For months, Kibbe held Abby in unimaginable conditions. Each day, a battle between hope and terror. And all the while, the world kept searching, unaware that the answers were much closer than anyone imagined. Nathaniel Nate Kibbe was born on July 15, 1980, in the same town as Abby. Details about his early life are murky, but some sources suggest he was raised by his mother alone, never knowing his biological father. From a young age, Nate was a menace. He was the kind of child other kids whispered about in hushed tones, the bully who reveled in intimidation, the troublemaker every teacher dreaded. In school, he kept a secret list of enemies, a grim catalog of people he despised and planned to hurt. He got into fights, lashed out at authority figures, and exuded an unsettling aggression that made people keep their distance. Even as a teenager, Kibbe was already on law enforcement's radar. He ran with a gang worshipped firearms and had a string of offenses to his name: assault, illegal substance possession, theft. But somehow, he always slipped through the cracks, walking away with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Fate had a strange way of intertwining lives. Nate had attended the same high school as Abby, but with an 18-year age gap between them, their paths never crossed. After high school, he seemed to make an effort to clean up his act. He landed a job, kept his head down, and for a time, it seemed like he had turned a new leaf. But the darkness within him was never truly gone. A few years later, after a heated dispute at work, he quit and moved to a trailer park in a rough part of town. His neighbors quickly learned to steer clear of him. His irritable and aggressive nature made sure of that. By 2011, Kibbe, now in his 30s, had entered a disturbing new chapter in his life. He took in a runaway teenage girl from a broken home, openly parading their relationship with no consequences. People whispered, but no one acted. Then came the spring of 2013. Nate attempted his first kidnapping. A 15-year-old schoolgirl was waiting at a bus stop when he struck, trying to shove her into his car. But the girl fought back fiercely, screaming until passers-by rushed in. Nate sped away, vanishing before anyone could catch him. Shockingly, despite eyewitness accounts, the case was closed. Authorities dismissed him as a minor threat. They were so very wrong. It was the eve of her 15th birthday. That morning, she had excitedly worn a new pair of hiking boots, a gift she had been eager to break in. But by the end of the school day, she regretted her decision. Her feet ached with every step as she walked home. That's when the old pickup truck pulled up beside her. The driver, a man in his early 30s, smiled warmly. "Need a ride?" Abby hesitated. There was something about him, something unsettling. So she shook her head. "No, thanks." But the man didn't drive off. Instead, he rolled along beside her, eyes locked onto her limping form. "You okay? You're walking kind of funny." Abby sighed. "My new boots. Too tight." His smile widened as he reached over and pushed open the passenger door. "Hop in. I'll take you home." For a moment, she considered running, but his voice was friendly, reassuring. He seemed like one of those harmless small-town guys, maybe a dad, maybe a brother, and her feet hurt so badly. So she got in. As they drove, the man, Nathaniel Kibbe, chatted casually, cracking jokes, making her laugh. He made her feel at ease, safe. But then, suddenly, he pulled into a dark, empty parking lot. A knot of fear twisted in Abby's stomach. She glanced at him. His expression had changed. "You can drop me off here," she said quickly. "I can walk from here." He didn't respond. Abby's fingers fumbled with the seatbelt. But before she could move, Kibbe struck. He grabbed her with one hand and yanked open the glove compartment with the other. A gun, the cold barrel pressed against her cheek. "Try anything," he whispered, "and I'll shoot." Terror flooded her. He moved quickly, tying her hands and feet with zip ties, before forcing a baseball cap over her head, angling it just enough to block her vision. But when she tried to peek beneath the brim, he noticed. His temper flared. With a snarl, he pulled out a stun gun and pressed it to her ribs. A jolt of electricity tore through her body. And then, darkness. It smelled of damp wood and dust. The walls were cold, metallic. A shipping container. She tried to scream, but her mouth was taped shut. Her eyes widened as she heard footsteps. Then the door creaked open, and there he was, Nathaniel Kibbe, holding duct tape and a motorcycle helmet. He worked quickly, taping her mouth and eyes, before sliding the helmet onto her head. Panic clawed at her chest. She struggled, but he was stronger. Then came the horror. Kibbe assaulted her repeatedly, subjecting her to his sick fantasies. Every day, he reinforced her terror, threatening to harm her family if she tried to escape. Yet, in the midst of her nightmare, Abby made a decision. She would survive. She realized something. Kibbe wasn't just a monster. He was lonely, desperate for validation. She saw how he fed off control, off feeling needed. So she adapted. She played the part. "I don't judge you," she whispered one day. "Everyone makes mistakes." She pretended to trust him. She acted as though she believed he would let her go. And slowly the walls he had built around himself began to crack. What Kibbe didn't know was that Abby was playing a long game, and she intended to win. Nate was unpredictable. The smallest word or action could send him into a violent rage, transforming him into a monster. Yet at times, he displayed a twisted kind of tenderness, as if he wanted to convince himself and Abby that he was capable of kindness. But the brutality always returned, his dark side ruling over any fleeting moments of warmth. The container where Abby was imprisoned was soundproofed so well that no one outside could hear her screams, no matter how hard she cried for help. For weeks, she remained trapped in that suffocating darkness, isolated from the world. But then, unexpectedly, Nate changed the rules. After about a month, he started bringing her inside his trailer. At first, it was just to take a shower, a cruel tease of normalcy. Then, he allowed her to sit with him and watch TV. It was during one of these moments that they saw a news report about the ongoing search for Abigail Hernandez. Missing posters, candlelight vigils, desperate pleas from her mother. That's when Nate had an idea. "Write a letter to your mom," he ordered one night, handing her a pen and paper. "Tell her you're fine so they stop looking for you." Abby's hands trembled as she wrote, every word dictated by her captor. But in every letter, she tried to leave hidden clues, subtle hints about where she was. A specific word, a slight misspelling, a detail that might trigger suspicion. But Nate was no fool. He saw through her attempts. Each time she tried to outsmart him, he punished her harshly. The pain taught her a cruel lesson. Obedience was the only way to survive. Months passed. Abby learned to navigate the unpredictable world of her captor, obeying when necessary, staying silent when required. She became part of his life, albeit unwillingly. Then one day, he let his guard down. Nate had a secret side business, counterfeit money. As his trust in Abby grew, he forced her to help him. She printed fake bills, cooked his meals, slept in his trailer some nights. He demanded she call him master, never revealing his real name. But Abby was observant. One evening, flipping through a book he had given her, she saw a name scribbled in the margins. Nathaniel Kibbe. Was it his real name? Or just another mind game? She took a risk. The next time she spoke to him, she used it casually. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice steady despite the terror twisting inside her. Nate stiffened. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then, he rolled his eyes, sighed, and asked, "Where did you hear that?" Abby's heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. "I saw it in a book." He smirked but said nothing. She had won a small victory, but it wasn't enough to set her free. Abby had no way of knowing that. At one point, salvation had been just a few feet away. One day, law enforcement arrived at Nate's trailer. Not for her, but for him. He had been caught illegally possessing a firearm. In a desperate attempt to avoid jail time, he cooperated with the police, admitting to the offense. Officers searched his trailer looking for weapons. They checked every corner, every drawer, but not the container. Had they just opened it, Abby would have been saved. Instead, Nate got away with nothing more than a fine. He must have felt invincible. And why wouldn't he? He had dodged justice so many times before. And then came Lorraine. In July 2014, Nate met a woman named Lorraine at a bar. She was desperate, struggling to pay her rent, drowning in financial woes, seeing an opportunity to manipulate. Nate took her home. After their brief encounter, Lorraine mentioned her money troubles. As she left, Nate handed her 2 crisp $50 bills. She thought her luck had changed, until the next day when she discovered the bills were fake. Furious, she called Nate, her voice shaking with rage. "You gave me counterfeit money," she screamed. "I already told the police. They're coming with a warrant." She hung up. She had no idea that her anger had just saved a life. On July 20th, everything changed. Without explanation, Nate shoved all of Abby's belongings into a bag. He tied her hands, placed a baseball cap over her face, and led her to his car. Fear gripped her. Was this it? Was he finally going to kill her? The car drove for miles. Silence. Then suddenly he pulled over on a deserted country road. "Get out," he ordered. Abby hesitated. "And don't you dare go to the police." She stepped out, too shocked to process what was happening. The next moment, Nate floored the gas pedal, disappearing into the distance. Was this real? Was she really free? Dazed, she walked aimlessly, afraid it was all a cruel trick. Then she saw a sign, a familiar name. She was close to home. She started running. The Hernandez family's front door had a surveillance camera. It captured everything. Abby thin, exhausted, wide-eyed, walking up the steps. Inside, her mother was on the phone. "Mom?" Abby's voice trembled as she called out. Silence. Then the sound of something hitting the floor. Her mother had dropped the phone. A moment later, the door flew open. Tears. Shaking hands. Disbelief. A desperate embrace. She was home. She was safe. But the nightmare wasn't over. Nathaniel Kibbe still roamed free. And soon the world would learn the full horror of what he had done. Abby clung to her mother, sobbing uncontrollably, her body trembling from the weight of her ordeal. Xenia held her just as tightly, tears streaming down her own face, unable to believe that her nightmare had finally ended. Her daughter was home, safe. But as Xenia pulled back slightly to look at Abby, her heart twisted. Her little girl had changed. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed, her once vibrant face now pale and weary. The months of torment had left their mark. Xenia's hands gripped Abby's shoulders as she searched her face. "Where have you been? What happened?" she asked urgently. "We need to go to the police right now." Panic flashed across Abby's face. She couldn't. Not yet. The memory of his threats rang in her ears. What he would do to her family if she ever spoke out. The fear still had its claws in her. So she lied. "I don't know," she whispered, shaking her head. "I can't remember anything." Even when they went to the police, Abby stuck to her story. No names, no places, only vague, broken recollections. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting the ones she loved. For a week, she wrestled with her guilt and fear. Every night, she lay awake, the walls of her bedroom feeling like a prison. Could she really let him go free? Could she live with herself, knowing he was still out there watching, waiting? Finally, she broke. One evening, with shaking hands, she turned to her mother and confessed everything. The man, the container, the fear, the unspeakable horrors she had endured. Xenia's hands curled into fists. She had never felt rage like this before. "We're going back to the police," she said firmly. "He cannot get away with this." And so, on July 27, 2014, Abigail did what she once thought impossible. She spoke his name, Nate Kibbe. She gave them everything. The make of his car, the license plate, every chilling detail she could remember. Within 24 hours, he was in custody. Surprisingly, he didn't resist. Instead, he denied everything. His face was expressionless as they took him away in handcuffs. But the evidence spoke for itself. When authorities searched his trailer and the container where Abby had been held, they uncovered a horrifying truth. Strands of her hair, traces of blood, sweat stains, even broken fingernails, silent screams of the pain she had suffered. Despite the overwhelming proof, Kibbe's lawyer filed a motion for bail in August. And then, to the shock of an entire nation, the judge granted it. The public outcry was immediate. How could a monster like him be allowed to walk free? But there was one silver lining. A strict order was issued, preventing him from coming anywhere near Abigail or her family. The trial against Nathaniel Kibbe stretched on for nearly 2 years. And then, in May 2016, in a desperate attempt to lessen his sentence, he took a plea deal and finally admitted his guilt. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the verdict. 90 years in prison. But there was one catch. He could seek parole after 45 years. That day, Abigail took the stand. Her voice, though quiet, was unwavering. "I forgive him," she said, her eyes locked on the man who had stolen so much from her. "Because of him, I've learned to cherish my life and every single moment with my family." Her mother spoke next. "I hate you," Xenia said, her voice thick with emotion. "I hate you with everything in me. But I am grateful you let my daughter come home." As Kibbe was led away, Abigail felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. She had faced her fears and won. On September 8, 2017, Taylor Wright, a 33-year-old private investigator with a fearless attitude, made a decision that would forever change her fate. recently divorced and trying to start fresh. She had moved in with her girlfriend, Cassandra Waller, in Pensacola, Florida. Though the stress of her ongoing legal battles with her ex-husband loomed over her, she was determined to move forward. That day, Taylor stepped out of the house to meet a friend, unaware that she was walking straight into a deadly trap. Born on April 23, 1984, Taylor had always been a strong-willed woman. At 19, she met Jeff Wright. Their relationship was a roller coaster of passion and struggles. But despite their ups and downs, they believed their love could endure anything. 3 years later, they tied the knot. Taylor was ambitious. After graduating from the University of North Carolina in 2008, she pursued a career in law enforcement, becoming a police officer in Jacksonville, North Carolina. By 2011, the couple had a son, but the joys of parenthood also brought new challenges. Over time, their relationship began to unravel. The once happy marriage turned into a battlefield, and by 2015, Taylor and Jeff initiated their divorce proceedings. The separation was anything but amicable. Jeff was convinced that Taylor was unfaithful, and his suspicions were confirmed when she moved in with Cassandra. But their disagreements weren't just about emotions. Money and the custody of their son became the center of their bitter feud. Taylor, no longer working as a police officer, had transitioned into private investigation, a profession that matched her relentless and bold personality. However, her erratic behavior during the divorce made things difficult. She had been arrested multiple times for harassment. She even followed Jeff when he picked up their son. This behavior ultimately led to Jeff gaining full custody in 2016, a decision that enraged Taylor. She was not one to back down from a fight, and she immediately launched a legal battle to regain custody. By September 2017, tensions had escalated beyond control. Taylor was embroiled in a fierce financial dispute with Jeff. In a desperate move to outmaneuver him, she secretly withdrew $100,000 from their joint account, money that was supposed to be used for child support. Knowing that Jeff would come after her, she devised a plan. She would divide the money and entrust portions of it to friends for safekeeping. One of those friends was Ashley MacArthur, a former crime scene technician with whom Taylor had developed a deep friendship over the past year. Taylor trusted Ashley enough to give her $34,000 for safekeeping. But trust can be a dangerous thing, especially when money is involved. Taylor thought she was securing her future. She had no idea. She had just sealed her fate. Taylor Wright had been dealing with a mountain of problems, but none seemed as pressing as the money she had entrusted to her friend, Ashley MacArthur. When Taylor needed it back, Ashley always had a new excuse. There were issues with the bank. She hadn't had time to withdraw it. The reasons kept piling up, and Taylor's suspicions grew stronger. Was the money gone? Determined, Taylor persistently demanded Ashley return the full amount. But Ashley evaded her every time. Frustrated and desperate, Taylor confided in her close friend, Cassandra Waller, during dinner on the evening of September 7, 2017. Over a dimly lit table at the restaurant, Taylor vented about her financial troubles and Ashley's reluctance to return the money. Cassandra listened intently, offering words of support, but even she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ashley wasn't just delaying, she was hiding something. Taylor revealed that the next day, September 8th, she and Ashley were supposed to meet at the bank to withdraw the $34,000. As Cassandra left for work that morning, she noticed Ashley parked near the driveway, waiting for Taylor. That would be the last time Cassandra ever saw her girlfriend. As the hours passed, Taylor stopped responding to Cassandra's messages. When she finally received a text, it felt off. Taylor had suddenly backed out of their dinner plans, claiming she needed time to clear her head. But Cassandra knew Taylor better than that. As a private investigator, Taylor had the skills to vanish if she wanted to. But this disappearance didn't feel like her choice. Worry gnawed at Cassandra. She repeatedly called Taylor, but the calls went unanswered. Strangely, some of her messages were marked as read, yet there was no reply. Days passed, and Taylor's absence became impossible to ignore. She hadn't returned home. Her belongings were untouched. Most disturbing of all, she hadn't contacted her young son, a move completely out of character. Growing increasingly anxious, Cassandra reached out to the police. Instead of immediate action, they advised her to check with Taylor's ex-husband, Jeff Wright. When she did, Jeff revealed that even their son had been trying to reach Taylor, but to no avail. Then, he issued a chilling warning. Taylor won't like that you involved the police. Be careful. By then, Cassandra's fear had turned into terror. She called hospitals, desperate for any sign of Taylor. After a week with no leads, she filed a missing persons report. The police began their investigation, first questioning Cassandra, since she had lived with Taylor. Searching their home, they found Taylor's ID, cash, and even a revolver. Items she would never leave behind if she were voluntarily disappearing. If Taylor had truly gone off the grid, why was everything she needed still at home? The investigation quickly shifted focus. Jeff, despite his ongoing custody battle with Taylor, was ruled out. He had been in North Carolina the entire time. That left one person, Ashley MacArthur. Ashley, the last person to see Taylor, showed no signs of distress. In her police interview, she was eerily flirtatious, even carefree, as though her friend's disappearance meant nothing. According to her, Taylor had already taken the money, packed it in a travel bag, and left. No reason to worry, she insisted. But as detectives dug deeper, Ashley's story started unraveling. She claimed that on September 8th, she and Taylor had spent the day driving around, visiting various locations, and even stopping by her family's property for horseback riding. Later, Ashley said, she dropped Taylor off at her house, where Taylor supposedly took an Uber to a bar. The problem? There was no evidence that Taylor had ever gotten into an Uber that night. I don't believe Taylor's been harmed, Ashley told detectives with a casual shrug. I think she's just doing what she does. She's tough, always carrying weapons, knives, guns. She's not an easy target. The more police scrutinized Ashley, the more the cracks in her story widened. Text messages between her and Taylor painted a different picture. One where Taylor was begging for her money back, and Ashley was dodging her with endless excuses. It became clear Ashley had the most to gain from Taylor's disappearance, and she was the only one who knew what had really happened to her. The investigation into Taylor Wright's disappearance took a chilling turn when detectives uncovered inconsistencies in Ashley MacArthur's statements. Initially, Ashley claimed that Taylor had called an Uber, but there was no record to confirm it. The lack of evidence raised suspicions, but without concrete proof, the investigators had no choice but to let Ashley go. Despite being free, Ashley remained strangely involved, contacting the police almost daily to ask about the case. It was odd. Why was she so concerned if she had insisted that Taylor was fine? To seem cooperative, she even provided new details, mentioning people she had seen Taylor with. But the detectives weren't convinced. They kept circling back to one undeniable fact. Ashley owed Taylor $34,000. Forensic experts knew that people had committed heinous crimes over much less. Could Ashley have murdered her friend to avoid repaying the money? The theory became even more plausible when investigators learned that Ashley had deposited Taylor's check into her own account. If she had already spent the money, was she stalling for time? And when Taylor refused to let the debt slide, had Ashley decided to silence her for good? Ashley's past made her even more suspicious. She had previously worked as a crime scene technician, meaning she understood the intricacies of investigations. Her husband, Zachary MacArthur, was a former deputy sheriff, raising concerns about whether Ashley had inside connections that could help her evade capture. Taylor Wright was reported missing on September 14, 2017. By October, Ashley was questioned for the second time. This time, Detectives noticed a drastic change in her demeanor. The woman who had once been flirtatious and outgoing now appeared nervous and defensive. She knew a second interrogation meant that the police had something against her. And she was right. A major breakthrough came when authorities gained access to Taylor's phone records. Ashley's alibi crumbled. The locations she claimed they had visited did not match the records. Investigators began scrutinizing Ashley's and her husband's phone and bank records, uncovering even more damning evidence. On the day Taylor vanished, Ashley had made multiple calls from a property owned by the McCarthys, nowhere near where she initially said she had been. As detectives continued digging, they uncovered another alarming detail. Ashley had forged Taylor's signature to deposit the $34,000 check. This wasn't just about financial fraud anymore. Something much darker was at play. Under pressure, Ashley changed her story. She now claimed Taylor had taken an Uber to buy illegal substances and later returned to the farm. Why hadn't she mentioned this before? She said she didn't want to ruin Taylor's reputation, but the detectives weren't buying it. If Ashley was so concerned, why hadn't she called the police when Taylor didn't return? Why hadn't she tried to find her, realizing she was caught in a web of lies? Ashley eventually stopped cooperating and demanded a lawyer. Meanwhile, investigators launched searches across 3 properties owned by the McCarthys. On the morning of October 19, 2017, Ashley was called in for questioning to keep her occupied while officers conducted their searches. At first, they found nothing, but later that day, using police dogs, they made a horrifying discovery. A small, recently dug pit covered with concrete caught their attention. When officers began digging, their worst fears were confirmed. A human skull with a bullet hole lay beneath the dirt and debris. Nearby, they found a necklace identical to the one Taylor had been wearing in a photo. Forensic tests confirmed the remains belonged to Taylor Wright. That same evening, Ashley McCarthy was arrested and charged with Taylor's murder. The trial began in August 2019. During opening statements, Ashley's defense attorney argued that there was no physical evidence linking her to the crime. He questioned Taylor's mental stability, suggesting she had been using illegal substances. But the prosecution had a different story. Assistant State Attorney Bridget Jensen laid out a compelling case. Ashley McCarthy had a clear motive: money. Taylor had persistently asked for her $34,000 back, sending multiple texts. On September 8, 2017, Ashley and Taylor met in person to discuss the money. That meeting would be Taylor Wright's last. What started as a financial dispute ended in a brutal betrayal. A woman trusted her friend, only to be deceived in the worst way imaginable. But in the end, justice caught up with Ashley McCarthy. On a seemingly ordinary day, Taylor Wright vanished without a trace. Her friend, Ashley McCarthy, claimed they had been horseback riding at a farm, but soon, cracks began to form in Ashley's story. The prosecutor, Assistant State Attorney Bridget Jensen, pointed out that cell tower records placed Ashley miles away from the farm at the exact time she claimed to be there. Suspicion grew as investigators began to dig deeper into Ashley's double life. Ashley McCarthy, a married woman, had a secret affair with a man named Brandon Beatty. Her financial troubles mounted, and soon it was revealed that she had spent nearly all of Taylor's money Taylor had entrusted to her. Investigators discovered that Ashley had used the stolen funds to purchase a boat for her secret lover. In court, Brandon admitted that Ashley constantly showered him with expensive gifts, but he had no idea where the money came from. Then came the most chilling revelation. Taylor Wright's body was found in October 2017, buried in a shallow grave on a piece of land owned by the McCarthy family. The grave was hastily covered with concrete and potting soil. Surveillance footage from a local Home Depot surfaced, showing Ashley purchasing the exact same materials just days after Taylor disappeared. When authorities unearthed Taylor's remains, they found a projectile lodged in the back of her skull. though it was too damaged to be linked to a specific firearm. Ashley's defense team fought back, arguing that she had chronic back issues and couldn't have moved Taylor's body alone. They pointed out that no crime weapon, no eyewitnesses, and no DNA evidence directly linked her to the murder. They even tried to cast suspicion on Taylor's ex-husband, Jeff, despite his airtight alibi. But the most damning evidence against Ashley came from her own words. During the trial, a bartender named Audrey Warren testified that Ashley had openly boasted about wanting Taylor dead. She revealed that Ashley once spoke about slipping an illegal substance into Taylor's beer, coldly stating that this world would be better without Taylor. When questioned further, Audrey recalled Ashley making a chilling remark. "She's too small to fight back, so I'd just shoot her." But Taylor's murder wasn't Ashley's only crime. As the trial unfolded, jurors learned that she had also been embezzling thousands of dollars from her family's business, Pensacola Automatic Amusement. Between 2015 and 2017, she pocketed revenue meant for local businesses, including the Azalea Cocktail Lounge and Seville Quarter. The stolen funds amounted to over $13,000. And then, just as suspicions arose, a suspicious fire broke out at the company. On the very day she was scheduled to meet with Azalea's management about the missing money. Investigators later determined that two separate fires had been set, deliberately, using kerosene or diesel fuel. Witnesses testified that the security alarm triggered twice the night before the fire, and Ashley had conveniently been the one to check on the building both times. When she returned the next morning, she noticed smoke and called the fire department. Later, she claimed that disgruntled ex-employees might have been responsible. Larry Johnson, a former Pensacola City Council member and owner of the Azalea Cocktail Lounge, didn't mince words when he testified against her. "This is a very dangerous individual," he warned the court. "She's a world-class con artist. She conned me, and I believe she deserves a significant prison sentence." Judge Jan Shackelford agreed. Ashley was sentenced to 84 months in state prison for her financial crimes, followed by 3 years of probation. But her biggest reckoning was yet to come. After a tense 4-day trial, the jury deliberated for just over 2 hours before reaching a verdict. Guilty. Ashley MacArthur was sentenced to life in prison with a mandatory minimum of 25 years. She later attempted to appeal the decision, arguing that the jury had seen a photo of her holding a shotgun and that certain evidence should not have been admitted. But the courts denied her appeal. As of 2024, Ashley MacArthur remains incarcerated at Lowell Annex Correctional Institution in Ocala, serving out her life sentence. Her story serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of betrayal, greed, and cold-blooded murder.
The small and quiet town of Springfield, nestled in Vermont, with a population of just over 4,000, was the kind of place where life seemed idyllic. Neatly trimmed lawns, friendly neighbors, and well-kept houses painted a picture of classic American countryside charm. In Springfield, everyone knew everyone, and news traveled faster than the morning newspaper. Among the most prominent families in town were the Hatchers. Richard and Martha Hatcher moved to Springfield 2 decades ago, when their children, James and Elizabeth, were very young. Over the years, they became well known to the local residents. Richard, a 52-year-old self-made man, built a successful construction business from scratch. His strong principles and belief in hard work and discipline earned him respect, especially among the workers on his construction sites. Stern, yet fair, Richard was a pillar of the community. Martha, his wife, in her early 50s, worked as a beloved teacher at the local school. Her kind heart and natural charm made her a favorite among her students and colleagues. Despite her gentle demeanor, Martha held firm moral principles, which she tried to instill in her family, though not without challenges. James, the eldest child at 25, was intelligent and reserved. He worked at the local library, securing the job shortly after graduating from college. A quiet thinker, James preferred the company of books to people, which often baffled his father, who wished his son were more outgoing and assertive. Despite this, James stayed true to himself, content in his world of knowledge and reflection. In stark contrast, 23-year-old Elizabeth was bright, cheerful, and brimming with creativity. A college student with dreams of becoming an artist, Elizabeth's passion for art sometimes sparked conflicts with her father, who doubted the stability of such a career. Undeterred, Elizabeth pursued her path with determination, brushing aside criticism. As with many small towns, Springfield had its share of gossip. Gary, the owner of a cafe on the main street and a close friend of Richard, was often at the center of it. Over coffee at the Hatcher House, Gary would discuss business and the latest town happenings. Recently, Gary had noticed a subtle tension between James and Elizabeth. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about their interactions made him uneasy. Unbeknownst to the townsfolk, Springfield was on the cusp of a tragedy that would shatter its peaceful facade. Detective Andrea Morris, an accomplished investigator from a neighboring city, was about to become an integral part of this story. Renowned for her analytical mind and ability to notice details others missed, Andrea had solved some of the most complex cases in her career. Soon, her expertise would be crucial in uncovering the truth behind the dark events brewing in quiet Springfield. What lay beneath the surface of the Hatcher family's seemingly perfect life, and how would the town's tranquility be upended? As secrets unraveled, Springfield would never be the same again. This story begins quietly, like the calm flow of a river, but soon plunges into the dark depths of forbidden feelings, secrets, and lies. Springfield, a peaceful and prosperous town, will soon become the epicenter of a drama with an unpredictable outcome. It all begins on an ordinary day when James and Elizabeth decide to spend time together. Their secret connection, carefully hidden for so long, starts becoming increasingly evident to others. This marks the beginning of the end, a tragedy that will soon shake not only their family, but the entire town. Gary, the owner of a local cafe and an old friend of the Hatcher family, is the first to notice the strange behavior between James and Elizabeth. In a town as small as Springfield, even the slightest anomaly attracts attention. Yet, Gary is reluctant to share his observations, understanding that family matters are delicate, and unwilling to stir up unnecessary rumors. However, his suspicions grow like a snowball. At first, the changes seem minor. Gary notices James and Elizabeth spending more time together, which isn't unusual for a brother and sister who had always been close. But their meetings become increasingly secretive. They often meet in secluded spots, such as the quiet banks of a river in summer or an abandoned chapel on the outskirts of town. One evening, Gary observes them in his cafe. Their conversation is hushed, their expressions serious, and their eyes? They avoid meeting those of the other patrons. Gary notices James lightly touching Elizabeth's hand, and when they leave, James hugs her tightly before they quickly exit, as if to avoid being seen. These little moments paint a picture that Gary doesn't want to admit. Gary begins to suspect a connection between James and Elizabeth that goes beyond ordinary family affection. But how could he tell Richard, his old friend, about this? How could he confront the possibility that Richard's children, raised with such love and strict morals, might be involved in something forbidden? Unable to jump to conclusions, Gary continues to observe. Over the following weeks, he notices James and Elizabeth avoiding others, frequently retreating to secluded walks leading to an old, abandoned barn hidden in the forest. One evening, unable to resist his growing anxiety, Gary follows them. Concealed among the trees, he watches as they enter the barn and close the door behind them. Hours pass, and when they finally emerge, their expressions are a mix of relief and unease, as if they had just unburdened themselves, but were bracing for the consequences. Gary's mind is plagued with questions that night. Should he share his observations with Detective Morris, a no-nonsense investigator known for uncovering the truth? Doing so would risk tarnishing the reputation of a family long regarded as a pillar of Springfield. The next day, Gary tries hinting at his concerns to Richard at a construction site, where Richard is supervising workers. Richard, however, brushes it off, attributing his children's behavior to normal teenage angst. But Gary's unease only deepens. He decides to continue watching James and Elizabeth, hoping to confirm his suspicions before taking any action. Meanwhile, James and Elizabeth grow more careful, leading a double life in secrecy. They remain unaware of Gary's watchful eyes as they retreat to their hidden barn, their actions weaving a mosaic of secrecy and forbidden emotions. As the weeks turn into months, tension grows in the Hatcher household. Richard and his wife Martha notice changes in their children. James becomes withdrawn and distant, while Elizabeth's usual cheer gives way to nervousness and irritability. Conversations between Richard and James yield no answers, as James deflects questions and isolates himself. Martha, sensing a similar shift in Elizabeth, initially attributes it to school pressures or friend-related issues. But Elizabeth's strong resistance to opening up, especially about James, triggers Martha's suspicions. The once open and trusting daughter now evades discussions, leaving her mother distraught and desperate for answers. The Hatcher family's dynamic begins to crumble, and the growing tension doesn't go unnoticed by the townspeople. Gary's suspicions solidify with every passing day, but he remains torn between loyalty to his friend and the unsettling truths he believes he has uncovered. All the while, the secrets of James and Elizabeth continue to unravel, setting the stage for a tragedy that will engulf not just their family, but the entire town of Springfield. The Hatcher household was shrouded in an unspoken tension that grew heavier with each passing day. Elizabeth's heart sank every time she noticed the growing distance between herself and James, but she could not bring herself to confront it fully. One evening, the atmosphere reached its breaking point during dinner. Richard, the family patriarch, finally lost his patience with the mounting silence. He turned sharply to his son, his voice firm but edged with concern. "James, what's going on?" he demanded, his gaze fixed on the young man across the table. "You've become withdrawn, avoiding work, and your mother is worried. Is something wrong? Maybe you're having problems at work, or are you quarreling with someone?" James froze, his fork hovering above his plate. His eyes flickered briefly toward Elizabeth, who sat opposite him. The glance was fleeting, but it conveyed a storm of emotions. Fear, guilt, uncertainty. Elizabeth nervously straightened her hair, avoiding her father's piercing gaze. "It's okay, Dad," James mumbled, lowering his head. "It's just a lot of work. That's all." Richard was not satisfied. His son's silence and his daughter's anxious demeanor only deepened his suspicions. "I don't think it's just work," he said firmly. "You and your sister have been acting strange lately. If you're having problems, why not share? We're a family. We're supposed to trust each other." Martha, ever the peacemaker, tried to soften the escalating tension. "Maybe we should just talk," she suggested gently. "James, Elizabeth, we just want to help you." But her words seemed to bounce off the invisible walls the siblings had built around themselves. Elizabeth abruptly pushed her plate away and stood up. "I'm not hungry," she muttered before leaving the room. The sound of her footsteps echoed down the hallway, leaving behind a heavy silence. Richard sighed irritably, his frustration mounting. He was a man of action, used to solving problems quickly and decisively, but here he felt powerless. His children's secretive behavior was a puzzle he couldn't piece together. Unbeknownst to the family, Gary, a close friend of James and Elizabeth, had been observing the changes in their behavior with growing concern. Unable to ignore the gnawing worry, he decided to confide in Detective Andrea Morris. Sitting in her office, Gary recounted the peculiar dynamics he had noticed. "I'm not sure if this is something criminal," he admitted, his hands fidgeting nervously. "But something is definitely wrong. I've known this family for years, and James and Elizabeth were always close, but now it feels like something else entirely." Detective Morris listened intently, her sharp mind processing every detail. "It could just be a family crisis," she said thoughtfully. But I agree there might be more to it. I'll talk to the family, see what I can uncover. Meanwhile, the tension between James and Elizabeth continued to escalate. Alone together, they had intense, emotional conversations that they carefully concealed from their parents. Each interaction only added to the weight of their shared secret. One late evening, when the house was quiet, Elizabeth crept into James's room. She closed the door behind her, her voice trembling as she whispered, "We can't go on like this, James. This is wrong, and you know it." James sat on the edge of the bed, his head bowed. "I know," he said finally, his voice filled with pain. "But I can't lose you, Elizabeth. We have to figure something out." Elizabeth's resolve wavered. Every word, every glance from her brother eroded her determination to put an end to their relationship. She knew their bond had crossed boundaries it shouldn't have, and yet she felt powerless to sever it. The following morning, Martha noticed Elizabeth leaving the house abruptly, skipping breakfast. Her instincts told her something was amiss, but Richard dismissed her concerns, insisting that their children needed space. Elizabeth made her way to the old barn on the edge of their property, a place laden with memories of her and James. She needed clarity, a resolution to the turmoil that was tearing them apart. Inside, she found James sitting on the floor, lost in dark thoughts. "We can't keep living like this," Elizabeth said, her voice breaking. "We need to make a decision, for us, for the family." James looked up at her, his face pale and weary. "I can't imagine a life without you," he murmured. "But if this is what you want..." Elizabeth's heart ached at his words. She thought about leaving, starting anew in a place where no one knew their story. But the idea was both a beacon of hope and a plunge into madness. Their secret was unraveling, pushing them closer to an inevitable reckoning. The old barn, once a sanctuary, had become the stage for a decision that would change their lives forever. James raised his head when he heard his sister's footsteps, and their eyes met. A storm of unspoken emotion swirled between them, filling the air with a tension they could no longer ignore. "We can't do this anymore, James," Elizabeth said, her voice trembling, though a steely resolve underpinned her words. "I thought about it all night. We have to leave." James stared at her, his mind racing. "Leave," he echoed, as if the word itself was foreign to him. "Where? How can we start over? We have no money, no plan. This is crazy, Elizabeth." Elizabeth stepped closer, her determination unwavering. "Here, we will never be understood. And if someone finds out what is happening between us, it will be the end. I'll sell my jewelry, and we can pawn something from the house. We'll start fresh somewhere no one knows who we are." The thought of leaving terrified James, yet the fear of losing Elizabeth was far greater. The conflict between staying and risking exposure versus leaving and embracing the unknown tore at him. "Are you sure this is the only way out?" he asked, searching her eyes for any glimmer of an alternative. Elizabeth's voice was steady now. "Yes, only trouble awaits us here. If we stay, everything will collapse sooner or later. We have to act now, while we still can." James sighed heavily, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew she was right, but leaving meant abandoning everything he'd ever known. Yet for Elizabeth's sake, he was willing to face the uncertainty. "Okay," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll leave, but we only have a few days to prepare. How do we do this?" Elizabeth had already formed a plan. "We'll sell whatever we can and collect enough money to move far away, somewhere no one will look for us." But fate had other plans. As they sat in the barn, deep in their clandestine conversation, Detective Andrea Morris was already on their trail. Gary's suspicions, fueled by months of observations and a recent conversation, had drawn her attention to the Hatcher family. Detective Morris, an experienced investigator, began her inquiries by interviewing neighbors and close family friends. She visited Gary's cafe, where he recounted everything he had seen and overheard. Whispers of tension, strange behavior, and secrets buried beneath the surface. Morris listened intently, asking probing questions and jotting down notes. It wasn't long before she suspected that the Hatcher family's issues ran much deeper than mere domestic disputes. Morris decided to visit the Hatcher house, approaching the family under the guise of a routine check. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the oppressive weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. Martha Hatcher greeted her at the door, her face pale and her demeanor anxious. She looked as though the weight of a terrible secret was crushing her. "Hello, Mrs. Hatcher," Morris greeted her with a professional smile. "I'm Detective Morris from the police department." Martha's eyes darted nervously as she stepped aside to let Morris Indiana. "Detective, is something wrong?" Morris's gaze swept the room, taking in the tense atmosphere. "Nothing serious, Mrs. Hatcher. I'm just following up on some community concerns. May I ask you a few questions?" Martha hesitated but nodded, leading Morris to the living room. As they sat down, Morris's sharp eyes noted the subtle signs of strain. A photo frame slightly askew, as if hastily replaced. The way Martha's hands trembled as she adjusted her shawl, the unease that seemed to permeate the air. "How is everything with your family?" Morris began, her tone casual but her intention clear. Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "We're fine," she replied, too quickly. Morris's instincts told her otherwise. "It must be difficult at times, keeping up with everything. Have you noticed anything unusual lately?" Martha's face paled further, and she shook her head. "No, nothing unusual," but the cracks were already beginning to show. Morris's keen intuition told her that the Hatchers were hiding something much darker than anyone had imagined. And as she delved deeper into her investigation, she knew she was closing in on the truth. The question was, would she uncover it before it was too late? The evening was tense in the Hatcher house. Martha, her hands trembling, had just let Detective Morris in, still unaware of the real reason for the visit. The detective, ever observant, began casually scanning the room as they spoke, her eyes falling on the family portraits lining the walls. Each photograph told a story, some happy, others darker, and in that moment, Morris sensed something amiss. "Mrs. Hatcher, how are your children?" Morris asked, her tone soft but pointed. "It seems there have been some changes in your home recently." Martha hesitated, unsure whether to trust the detective's casual questioning. "James and Elizabeth, they've always been close." "Sure, they've had their problems. What family doesn't? But nothing that would cause concern." Her voice faltered, a small detail Morris didn't miss. She watched as Martha nervously fiddled with the hem of her dress. It was a subtle sign, but it spoke volumes. Morris leaned in, her expression calm. "If you ever need to talk, Mrs. Hatcher, I'm here. But please remember, I'm just doing my job," leaving her business card. The detective made her exit, but the weight of her words lingered in the air. As the door closed behind her, Martha's unease deepened. She couldn't shake the feeling that the detective knew more than she had let on. Upstairs, James and Elizabeth were preparing for a night of secrecy. In hushed whispers, they packed the last of their belongings. Every item felt like a silent step toward an uncertain future, one they had no choice but to embrace. Their bond, forged in desperation, had led them to this point, to escape before their hidden truth was revealed. "Do you think we can really do this?" Elizabeth whispered, her voice trembling as she zipped up her suitcase. "We have to," James replied, his voice steady. "It's now or never." But as they crept down the stairs, their hearts pounding in their chests, the unexpected happened. Richard, their father, appeared at the foot of the stairs, blocking their path. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was low, laced with suspicion. The suitcases at their feet only heightened the tension. James took a step forward, his jaw clenched. "We're leaving, Dad. We can't stay here any longer." Richard's face hardened, his eyes narrowing with doubt. "What are you hiding from me?" he demanded, his voice cold. The silence in the room was suffocating. James' anger flared. He had no time for explanations, not when his life was on the line. "We'll decide for ourselves what's best," he snapped. Richard's expression turned to one of hurt and confusion. He had always prided himself on his control over his family, but now, standing before him, were two children who had grown into strangers. His refusal to let go of his authority became a battle of wills. "I won't let you leave without knowing what's going on," he said, his voice growing firmer. Elizabeth, standing behind James, felt the tension crackling in the air. She knew if they didn't leave now, everything would unravel. Desperation clawed at her, and she placed a hand on her brother's shoulder. But her touch, meant to calm him, acted as a trigger. In a split second, James acted, driven by a mix of fear and rage. He shoved his father aside. Richard lost his footing, stumbling backward. The crash of his body hitting the stairs echoed in the quiet house, and in an instant, everything changed. Richard's head struck the sharp edge of the step, and the sound of it was chilling, as if the world had stopped. Elizabeth screamed, rushing to her father, but it was too late. His body lay motionless, blood seeping from the back of his head. In that moment, the life they knew came to an end. James, frozen in disbelief, stared at his father's lifeless form. The reality of his actions hit him like a freight train. Elizabeth, shaking uncontrollably, tried in vain to wake her father, her hands trembling as she touched his cold skin. But there was no response. And so, in a single tragic moment, everything that had been hidden, every secret, every lie, was brought to the surface. The weight of their decisions was now irreversible. The path ahead was no longer one of escape, but of consequences too dire to escape. The Hatcher home stood still, its silence now deafening. James and Elizabeth had fled, leaving behind chaos and death. Richard was dead, and it was their fault. Everything they had tried to save was gone in an instant. The secret they had kept for so long now took on a far darker, more terrible meaning. Elizabeth's voice broke the silence. "We have to leave." Her words were trembling with panic, but James couldn't move. His body was paralyzed with horror, guilt, and regret. He couldn't escape the weight of what they had just done. But Elizabeth, realizing that every second of delay would only make things worse, grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the exit. They ran out of the house, abandoning everything. Their plan to escape had now become a desperate flight from justice. They had no idea what awaited them, but one thing was certain: there would be no going back. Meanwhile, Detective Andrea Morris, who had been following a different investigation, received an urgent call. A suspicious incident at the Hatcher residence had come to light. She immediately recognized that it might be connected to her ongoing work and rushed to the scene. Upon arrival, she was met with an eerie silence. The doors to the house were wide open. As she stepped inside, the floor creaked under her feet and a strange, unsettling feeling gripped her. The smell of blood lingered in the air. Her instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. She scanned the house quickly, but when she found Richard's lifeless body at the foot of the stairs, her heart nearly stopped. The fear and surprise frozen on his face were haunting. Even after years of experience, this sight shook her to her core. She understood with chilling clarity that the culprits had fled, but she also knew that the truth behind Richard's death would not be easily uncovered. With a heavy heart, Detective Morris began piecing together the evidence. Richard Hatcher had been pushed deliberately, a brutal act that ended his life. Blood found at the scene confirmed that James had been involved. It was clear that this wasn't an accident, but a deliberate act that had been carefully planned. The investigation continued to unravel dark secrets. James and Elizabeth had withdrawn large sums of money from their bank accounts days before the incident. It confirmed their intent to escape, making it obvious that they had premeditated their father's murder. Morris delved into the family's history. The bond between James and Elizabeth seemed far from normal. Their relationship, which had once been a shared secret, now appeared to be the root of their downfall. Interviews with family members revealed disturbing signs of change in the siblings' behavior, but no one had ever suspected that things would end this way. When the case reached court, it garnered national attention. The public was gripped by the unimaginable actions of these young people. What could have driven them to murder their own father? The trial was filled with emotional testimonies, compelling evidence, and expert examinations. Fingerprints, financial records, eyewitness accounts. All of it pointed directly to James and Elizabeth's guilt. The judge, though compassionate, couldn't ignore the gravity of their crime. The once loving siblings had now become cold killers. The verdict came swiftly. James and Elizabeth were found guilty of murder and sentenced to long prison terms, without the possibility of parole. For their mother, Martha Hatcher, this was the ultimate betrayal. Losing her husband and children in such a brutal way left her heartbroken and unable to find solace. The house that once felt like home was now a cold, empty shell. Every corner reminded her of happier times, and she couldn't help but feel guilt for not seeing the cracks in her family sooner. James and Elizabeth were separated in prison, each imprisoned by their own guilt and the weight of their shared secret. Every day behind bars was a painful reminder of their mistake, of the love that had turned into a prison of their own making. The Hatcher family tragedy left an indelible mark on the community of Springfield. The case served as a chilling reminder that some secrets are too dark to keep hidden. The consequences of running from the truth can destroy not only lives but entire families. As time passed, the story of the Hatcher family would linger in the town's memory, a tragedy rooted in secrecy, betrayal, and the irreversible consequences of a desperate attempt to escape the truth. The case of James and Elizabeth Hatcher was one that Detective Andrea Morris would never forget. It had started as a typical investigation, but it quickly became something much more personal. The weight of the crime they had committed haunted her. How could things have spiraled so far? What had pushed these siblings to such a tragic end? After their arrest, James and Elizabeth were immediately separated and placed in different prisons, a decision that came out of necessity. The authorities feared that their time together could lead to further manipulation or a dangerous bond of complicity. In the sterile, unforgiving isolation of their new lives behind bars, both siblings were forced to confront the truth of their actions in solitude. For James, life in prison was the ultimate test. While he had always been alone, the type of isolation he now faced was unthinkable. He could no longer block out the suffocating memories of the fateful night when he pushed his father, the catalyst for everything that followed. Every waking moment was filled with regret, every shadow a reminder of the family he had destroyed. He had always believed he was capable of anything, but now he was left with nothing but his fears and his guilt. Elizabeth, on the other hand, tried to hide the fragility beneath the surface. Despite her youth and the external signs of weakness, the constant awareness that she would never see her brother again wore on her more than the prison itself. Her mind often wandered to what could have been, if only she had acted differently, if she had stopped the chaos before it had spiraled out of control. The dreams of escape and a new life seemed like distant echoes, a cruel reminder that their plans had always been doomed. The truth of their situation sank deep into her bones, and she had no choice but to face it. The trial, which garnered national attention, revealed all the facts, piece by piece. The evidence was damning. Fingerprints, financial records, witness testimonies, and forensic reports all pointed directly to the siblings. There was no escaping the gravity of their crime. The cold, impartial verdict seemed inevitable. They were both convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. It was a harsh sentence, but the judge, considering the circumstances, knew it was the only option. For Martha Hatcher, the verdict was the final crushing blow. She had already lost her husband, and now her children as well. The house that once held laughter, warmth, and life had become a tomb of memories, each corner a reminder of what she had lost. The guilt of not seeing the warning signs, of not being able to protect her family, ate away at her, but it was too late to change anything. Her life, and the life of the Hatcher family, was irreparably shattered. The aftermath of this tragedy rippled through Springfield. The town, known for its peacefulness, would never forget the horror that unfolded within the walls of the Hatcher house. What started as an innocent affair, a moment of weakness, turned into a fatal spiral that claimed more than just lives. It destroyed everything they had known. It would go down in history as one of the darkest chapters in the town's story. For Detective Morris, bringing the case to a close was bittersweet. Yes, justice had been served, but there was an ache in her heart. No matter how thoroughly she had investigated, the sad reality was that the truth had come at too high a price. She had done what was required, but the personal toll of witnessing such destruction lingered within her. As the final pages of the case were closed and the courtroom cleared, life in Springfield slowly resumed. Yet, the story of James and Elizabeth would never fade. The town, forever marked by their tragedy, knew that even in the most serene corners of the world, darkness could take root. The Hatcher house stood empty, a hollow reminder of the fragility of family bonds and the hidden, dangerous secrets that can unravel everything in an instant. Tifton, Georgia, a quaint, tight-knit southern town where everyone seemed to know each other, was shaken to its core in December 2019 by a tragedy that unraveled the seemingly perfect life of one of its most respected citizens. This is a story of love, obsession, and betrayal that ended in murder, leaving haunting questions in its wake. Willie Tanners, 49, was a beloved figure in Tifton. He owned Tanner's Hardware, a local institution serving the community for over 2 decades. Known for his warm smile and helpful advice, Willie was more than a businessman. He was a friend to many. Whether a customer needed a screwdriver or guidance on fixing a leaky faucet, Willie was there, offering not just tools but also camaraderie. At home, Willie's life seemed equally idyllic. Married to his high school sweetheart, Lynn Tanners, 48, he was part of a couple deeply involved in church activities and local charity events. To outsiders, their marriage appeared strong, built on years of shared memories and love. However, beneath the surface of this perfect picture lay a dark secret. Willie had become entangled in a secret relationship with Madison Kelly, an 18-year-old high school senior known for her striking looks and intelligence. Their connection began innocently enough. Madison was a frequent visitor to the hardware store, but over time, their interactions grew more personal. What started as a friendship soon spiraled into a fiery, passionate affair. Willie was torn between guilt and desire, unable to extricate himself from the emotional web he had woven. As the 2019 holiday season approached, Willie's behavior began to change. He spent less time at home, often working late, or so he claimed. Lynn, though concerned, attributed his distance to the pressures of running a business during the busiest time of the year. Yet, friends and neighbors noticed his once cheerful demeanor had dimmed, replaced by a distracted and worried air. On the morning of December 22, 2019, Tifton was serene. Residents were busy with last-minute Christmas preparations, unaware of the darkness about to descend on their town. Around 9 a.m., Lynn returned home to their cozy residence on Bride Street after volunteering at First Baptist Church to help prepare for the Christmas Eve service. Seeing Willie's truck in the driveway puzzled her. He had mentioned needing to run errands for the store. As Lynn stepped into their home, the familiar scent of fresh pine greeted her. Their Christmas tree, adorned with colorful lights, stood proudly in the corner of the living room. Beneath it, gifts were carefully wrapped, some with her name on them. But the warmth of the festive scene was soon overshadowed by a chilling discovery. Lynn called out for Willie, but the house was eerily silent. She ventured further inside, her unease growing. Entering the master bedroom, her world shattered. Willie lay motionless on the floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. He had been brutally murdered. Panic-stricken, Lynn called 911, and within minutes, police and emergency responders arrived, turning their peaceful home into a crime scene. The investigation that followed revealed a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and obsession. Madison Kelly, the young woman Willie had been involved with, became a central figure in the inquiry. Madison, initially cooperative, soon became evasive under questioning. Her story changed multiple times, and inconsistencies began to emerge. Police discovered text messages and emails that painted a picture of a tumultuous relationship, filled with passion but also jealousy and conflict. Madison had grown increasingly possessive, resenting Willie's attempts to distance himself as his guilt mounted. The evidence pointed to a confrontation between Willie and Madison on the morning of December 22nd. Madison's fingerprints were found on a weapon, a hammer, used to bludgeon Willie to death. Faced with the evidence, she eventually confessed. The fiery relationship had culminated in a heated argument, during which Madison, overcome by anger and rejection, had lashed out violently. The murder of Willie Tanner shocked Tifton, leaving the community grappling with the loss of a man they admired and the revelation of the double life he led. Madison's trial was swift, and she was convicted of murder, sentenced to life in prison. In the aftermath, the Tanners' home on Bride Street became a somber reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. For Lynn, the pain of losing her husband was compounded by the betrayal she never saw coming. The town of Tifton, too, struggled to come to terms with the darkness hidden beneath its seemingly perfect surface. Willie Tanner's legacy, once defined by kindness and community, was forever shadowed by the tragic choices that led to his untimely death. The house was eerily silent as Lynn Tanner stepped inside, carrying the bags of groceries she had hurriedly purchased earlier that evening. Something felt off. Willie, her husband, didn't respond when she called his name. The cheerful Christmas tunes playing softly in her mind were quickly replaced by an ominous silence. Her breath hitched as she walked into the living room. The sight before her would haunt her forever. Willie's lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor near the base of the Christmas tree, surrounded by broken ornaments and shimmering tinsel. Blood had pooled beneath his head, soaking into the festive rug. A hammer lay discarded nearby, its handle smeared with what could only be his blood. The once cheerful scene now resembled something out of a nightmare. Lynn fell to her knees, her entire body trembling. She struggled to process what she was seeing, her mind refusing to believe it was real. Panic coursed through her, but somehow she managed to grab her phone and call 911. Through choking sobs, she described the horrifying scene to the operator. "Oh my God, my husband isn't breathing. There's blood everywhere." The operator's calm instructions barely registered as Lynn sat on the porch, tears streaming down her face. "Don't touch anything. Stay outside. Help is on the way." The quiet neighborhood street soon exploded with flashing red and blue lights. Emergency vehicles arrived within minutes, and curious neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering in hushed tones. Detective Nora Collins, a veteran investigator known for her sharp intuition, arrived on the scene shortly after. Stepping out of her unmarked car, she was immediately struck by the unsettling contrast. The Tanner house was adorned with festive Christmas lights, yet inside awaited a scene of unimaginable violence. The living room was a chilling juxtaposition of holiday cheer and brutality. Twinkling lights reflected off shattered ornaments, and bloodstains marred the once pristine ribbons and wrapping paper. Willie Tanner lay at the foot of the Christmas tree, his head crushed from multiple blows. The hammer, carelessly abandoned beside him, was quickly collected by the forensic team as evidence. Detective Collins surveyed the room with practiced eyes, noting the absence of any signs of a struggle beyond the immediate area. The crime scene was gruesome yet eerily controlled, as if the attack had come without warning. Dr. Philip K. Wong, the meticulous medical examiner, arrived shortly after to examine the body. He noted the severe head trauma that had likely caused instant death and estimated the time of death to be between 10 p.m. and midnight the previous night. Detective Collins ordered her team to comb through the house for evidence. Every fingerprint, every scrap of material, every photograph could be a crucial piece of the puzzle. The hammer was bagged and sent for analysis, while detectives questioned the distraught Lynn Tanner. Lynn, still in shock, struggled to provide coherent answers. Between sobs, she managed to recount her morning routine and Willie's activities the previous day. But something about her demeanor raised questions in Detective Collins's mind. Was it merely grief? Or was there something more she wasn't saying? The investigation had only just begun, and the picture was far from complete. As the team continued their work, Detective Collins couldn't shake the feeling that this crime was personal, intimate. Someone had wanted Willie dead, and now it was her job to uncover the truth. Detective Nora Collins couldn't shake the feeling that Willie Tanner's murder was a crime of passion. The sheer brutality of the attack hinted at deep anger or jealousy, emotions that often fuel such violent acts. But who could hate Willie so much as to kill him in such a savage way? Collins was determined to find out. The first person on Detective Collins' list was Madison Kelly, an 18-year-old high school senior, and Willie's secret lover. Madison was known for her vibrant performances in the school drama club, recently impressing audiences in a local production of A Christmas Carol. But beneath the polished exterior was an emotionally fragile girl. Madison lived with her mother, Tammy Kelly, in a modest house on the outskirts of town. Tammy was a controlling woman, obsessively managing Madison's life after her husband left the family upon coming out as gay. When Detective Collins visited the Kelly residence on December 22nd, she found Madison in her room, visibly distraught. The room was a typical teenager space, adorned with posters of Taylor Swift and Ariana Grande. But the photo of Willie Tanner, shirtless and framed on her nightstand, and diaries filled with graphic entries about their relationship hinted at Madison's obsession with him. Madison admitted to the affair, describing her deep love for Willie and her dreams of a future together. But as Christmas neared, Willie had grown distant and Madison feared. He planned to end the relationship. When pressed about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, she hesitated, before claiming she was home alone, studying for exams. A weak alibi, her emotional instability, and obsession with Willie made her a prime suspect. However, her erratic statements about a mysterious man named Bob, who she claimed manipulated her into staying with Willie under threats of torture, added an unsettling layer of confusion. Detective Collins wasn't convinced by Madison's story. She needed more evidence, but Madison's behavior left Collins on high alert. The second person on Collins' list was Lynn Tanner, Willie's wife of 25 years. Lynn was a respected member of the community, deeply involved in church activities and local events. Outwardly, she seemed like the picture of warmth and stability, but Lynn had long suspected her husband of infidelity. In the days leading up to Christmas, Lynn had been busy preparing for church services and community gatherings. However, she confessed to Collins that Willie's increasing absences, which he often explained as work-related, had left her feeling uneasy. When Collins interviewed Lynn on December 22nd, Lynn recounted her shock at discovering Willie's body that morning, sitting at her kitchen table. She described her marriage, once loving but now strained, especially since their son had gone off to college. She admitted suspecting an affair after Willie repeatedly rejected her advances, but she had no concrete proof. On the night of the murder, Lynn claimed she had been at home, preparing for church, and then going to bed early. She assumed Willie had fallen asleep on the couch and only discovered the gruesome truth the next morning. Lynn's grief seemed genuine and she cooperated fully, providing access to Willie's belongings, including his phone and computer. Yet, as his wife, Lynn had both the opportunity and motive to commit the crime. Collins kept her under scrutiny. The third person on Collins' list was Tammy Kelly, Madison's controlling mother. Tammy was known in Tifton for her perfectionism and strict demeanor. After her husband left, Tammy became hyper-focused on Madison, micromanaging every aspect of her life. Tammy's obsession with appearances often translated into harsh treatment of her daughter. Rumors swirled about Tammy's extreme disciplinary measures, including disturbing stories of her punishing Madison for attracting male attention. When Detective Collins visited Tammy on December 23rd, she found a woman who appeared disturbingly unbothered by the events surrounding Willie's death. Tammy denied knowing anything about the relationship between her daughter and Willie. Her demeanor, though calm, exuded an air of calculation that didn't sit well with Collins. The living room was immaculate, adorned with traditional Christmas decorations. A perfectly decorated tree stood beside a nativity scene, casting a warm, festive glow. Tammy welcomed Detective Collins into her home, calm and composed, though an undercurrent of tension rippled beneath her demeanor. As the interview began, Collins asked about Tammy's relationship with Willie Tanner. Tammy praised Willie, calling him a good man and a pillar of the community, though her tone was distant. When the topic shifted to her daughter, Madison, Tammy's voice became more cautious. She expressed frustration with Madison's recent behavior, noting that her daughter had started wearing makeup and a bra in the weeks leading up to the murder. Tammy admitted she had tried to talk to Madison, but her daughter dismissed her concerns, insisting everything was fine. When Collins pressed about Madison's rumored sexual relationship with Willie, Tammy's composure cracked slightly. She denied any knowledge but accused Madison of dressing provocatively, even describing her as looking like a prostitute. Collins couldn't ignore the possibility that Tammy's intense need for control and the scandal of her daughter's alleged affair with an older man might have driven her to act. Tammy remained cold and cooperative throughout the interview, offering little useful information. As Collins left the Kelly home, she knew Tammy couldn't be ruled out as a suspect. The investigation was growing more complex, with each lead unveiling new layers of secrets and motives. Yet, without concrete evidence, the case remained a puzzle. On December 24, 2019, the investigation took a significant turn. It was a cold, gray morning in Tifton, Georgia, with temperatures hovering around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Detective Collins and her team returned to the Tanner residence to re-examine the crime scene. Among the carefully wrapped Christmas gifts near the fireplace, an officer discovered a torn piece of paper partially hidden under a rug. The note, though incomplete, bore the words, "Dirty boy, meet me at," followed by a time, 10 p.m., and the initials MK. The initials matched Madison Kelly, Willie's secret lover, and the time aligned with the estimated time of Willie's death. Collins immediately sent the note for forensic analysis and returned to the Kelly home to search for additional evidence. In Madison's bedroom, hidden under her mattress, Collins found a notebook filled with disturbing entries. Madison had detailed her obsession with Willie, describing their sexual encounters and secret plans to meet. One entry, dated December 22nd, matched the time and location mentioned in the note. This evidence placed Madison at the crime scene and revealed her motive, jealousy and obsession. Back at the station, forensic analysis confirmed that the handwriting on the note matched Madison's. This was the breakthrough Collins had been waiting for. Madison Kelly became the prime suspect in Willie Tanner's murder. During her second interrogation, Madison changed her story, claiming she had been manipulated by an imaginary lover named Bob. She described him as a high-ranking politician involved in bizarre rituals and insisted he had coerced her into killing Willie. When the police dismissed her tale, Madison shifted again, claiming Bob was a voice in her head, a symptom of mental illness. She argued that she wasn't in control of her actions on the night of the murder. However, the evidence, her handwriting on the note and her obsessive diary entries, painted a different picture. On December 26, 2019, Madison Kelly was officially arrested for Willie Tanner's murder. She was eerily calm as she was handcuffed and led away. The town of Tifton was left in shock, grappling with how a young woman with a promising future could commit such a heinous act. Willie's family, devastated by his loss, found solace in knowing the person responsible was behind bars. Yet, the pain of his absence, especially during the holidays, was profound. Madison's trial began in February 2020, drawing the attention of the entire town. District Attorney Robert Whitman argued that Madison's crime was premeditated, driven by her obsessive love for Willie. The courtroom listened intently as Whitman described how Madison's jealousy and rage culminated in a brutal murder when Willie tried to end their relationship. The evidence was damning, leaving little room for doubt about her guilt. In December 2019, the small town of Tifton, Georgia, was rocked by a crime that would leave its residents haunted for years. The murder of Willie Tanner, a well-respected hardware store owner, shook the close-knit community to its core. The prosecution's case was clear-cut, with evidence suggesting that Madison Kelly had intentionally brought a hammer to the scene of the crime, emphasizing the cold, calculated nature of her actions. Willie Tanner, who had led a secret double life, was found dead, his betrayal exposed in the courtroom. His family, sitting in the front row during the trial, listened in silence as the full extent of his secret relationship with 18-year-old Madison was revealed. Their grief was palpable, marked not only by the pain of his death, but also by the devastating betrayal. In stark contrast, the defense argued that Madison's actions were the result of a psychotic breakdown, driven by the overwhelming fear of losing Willie and the strain of their hidden affair. Karen Blackwell, her defense attorney, portrayed Madison as a vulnerable young woman, manipulated and eventually undone by the pressures of her difficult family life. She urged the jury to recognize Madison's fragile mental state at the time of the crime. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Madison Kelly was found guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence, 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15, sparked mixed reactions. Some believed it was too lenient for such a brutal act, while others felt it was a fair judgment, considering Madison's age and mental instability. The trial, while bringing some closure to Willie's family, left deep emotional scars that would never heal. His widow, Lynn Tanner, struggled with the revelation of Willie's infidelity. The weight of his double life was a burden she couldn't bear, and she eventually moved away, hoping to start anew, away from the painful memories of the past. As for Madison, she was transferred to a state prison to serve her sentence. Though she had tried to feign mental illness during the trial, subsequent psychiatric evaluations showed no signs of schizophrenia or any other condition that could explain her actions. Madison spent her days in relative isolation, her future, a promising one at one point, now a distant memory. Meanwhile, Willie's family decided to close his hardware store for good, a tragic symbol of the end of an era. The business, once a community hub, was no more, leaving a void in the town that would never be filled. Madison's mother, Tammy Kelly, faced her own struggles. Once a controlling presence in her daughter's life, she became a pariah in the town, blamed by many for Madison's downfall. Tammy withdrew from public life, hiding from the judgmental glances of her neighbors. As time passed, Tifton slowly began to return to normal, though the memory of the crime lingered. The 2019 Christmas season was quieter than usual, a reminder that even in the most familiar of communities, dark secrets can lurk beneath the surface, leading to tragedy. And so, the story of Madison Kelly and Willie Tanner would forever be etched in the town's history as one of its darkest chapters, a painful reminder of the hidden lives people lead and the devastating consequences of secrets left unspoken. Concealed identities broke into their home. Bobbish, abruptly awakened, was overpowered, blindfolded, and restrained with duct tape. As he struggled to make sense of the chaos, the intruders turned their attention to Caroline. The men, speaking with Greek and Albanian accents, demanded to know where the couple's money was hidden. Bobbish revealed the cash's location inside a Monopoly board game box. The intruders retrieved the money, but their greed and malice drove them to ransack the house further, searching for more valuables. Amid the chaos, Caroline resisted, pleading for the safety of her infant daughter. Her resistance enraged the intruders, who murdered her in cold blood. The violence escalated to a horrific level when the family's pet husky was strangled with its own leash and hung from the staircase. Bobbish, slipping in and out of consciousness due to his restraints, awoke to a haunting silence broken only by the cries of his daughter. Mustering all his strength, he managed to reach his phone and, using his nose, dialed emergency services. His muffled plea for help, "Robbers came in," was all he could manage. First responders arrived at the scene around 6 a.m., uncovering a nightmare. The house was in shambles, with belongings strewn everywhere and a security camera torn from the wall. The camera's memory card was missing, adding to the mystery. Caroline's lifeless body lay face down on the bed, while her infant daughter sat beside her, crying and clapping, attempting to wake her mother. The brutal murder of Caroline Crouch and the apparent robbery shocked Greece and the world. The sight of the strangled puppy added a grotesque layer to the crime, evoking widespread outrage. Yet, the unfolding investigation would reveal even darker truths. What initially appeared to be a robbery gone wrong turned into one of Greece's most shocking cases of domestic violence. Evidence began to unravel Babish's account of the events, leading investigators to a grim conclusion. The fairy tale romance had masked a chilling reality. When first responders arrived at the crime scene, they immediately observed Caroline's pale, lifeless body and determined she had been murdered. Her husband, Babish, was visibly shaken when freed from his restraints and confronted with the tragic sight of his wife, the woman he had loved for the past 5 years. After ensuring the safety of the couple's infant, police began interrogating Babish. Based on his account and the state of the crime scene, it was determined that 4 men were involved. Investigators concluded that 3 intruders had entered the house, while a 4th stood guard outside. The police interpreted the events leading up to Caroline's murder as follows. The intruders approached the house through a dirt road leading to the rear entrance. They attempted to break in through the rear door but failed, resorting instead to removing the security pins from a basement window to gain entry. Upon entering the maisonette, the intruders killed the family's 7-month-old husky, Roxy, using her own leash. The 3 men then made their way to the main bedroom, where Babish and Caroline were asleep. They ransacked the house, ultimately stealing 10,000 euros in cash and jewelry worth 20,000 euros hidden in a Monopoly box. Before leaving, the intruders murdered Caroline by smothering her with a pillow. Babish, who drifted in and out of consciousness due to his restraints, was likely presumed dead by the intruders, who believed they had left no witnesses. Caroline's death was not instantaneous. The 20-year-old suffered a prolonged attack lasting around 6 minutes. Bruises across her body suggested she fought back fiercely, while injuries to her lips and tongue hinted at the possible use of sharp objects. However, no evidence of sexual assault was found. Despite the significant damage inflicted on the house, the intruders left little evidence behind. First responders discovered only a single clue: the hood of one of the attackers. Babish claimed the hood had fallen off during a brief struggle, giving him a fleeting glimpse of one of the men. Using his description, authorities created a sketch of the suspect, an overweight, tall, dark-skinned man. Babish also noted that the intruders carried 2 firearms, a black pistol and a silver Colt. Police surmised that the crime was premeditated, as the intruders seemed aware of the hidden money and waited for the opportune moment to strike. A police spokesperson described the crime as exceptionally brutal and attributed it to individuals with a strong antisocial personality and a complete lack of empathy. While investigators were certain the attack was planned, many questions remained unanswered. If robbery was the primary motive, why was Caroline murdered? Was it possible the intruders were high on drugs and lost control of their actions? Could Caroline have recognized or seen the attackers, prompting them to kill her? Did Caroline resist and fight back, given her training as a black belt kickboxer? Did the murder occur because Caroline screamed when one of the intruders held a gun to her infant's temple? Police believe the gang had received a tip about the couple's finances. Investigations extended to Babish and Caroline's inner circle, as well as local security camera footage from nearby homes and businesses. The goal was to identify any suspicious activity leading up to the crime. Despite numerous speculations, one fact was clear: This crime was deliberate, calculated, and carried out by professionals who left a trail of heartbreak and unanswered questions in their wake. The murder of Caroline Crouch shook Greece to its core, leaving the public and investigators alike desperate for answers. On the morning of the murder, police identified a dark-colored vehicle and a motorcycle cruising around the couple's house. This detail hinted at a premeditated plan, but offered little clarity. Caroline Crouch was laid to rest 3 days later on the Greek island of Alonissos, a place filled with cherished memories of her childhood and her parents' love story. During the emotional ceremony, her husband, Babis Anagnostopoulos, paid tribute to Caroline, describing her as the joy of his life and the devoted mother of their daughter. He expressed his heartbreak, knowing that their daughter would grow up never remembering her mother. While the memorial unfolded, a significant development took place. In northeast Greece, near the Bulgarian border, police stopped a car during a routine check. Inside was 36-year-old Georgian national Georgi Haradishvili. He presented a passport, which was soon identified as fake. Haradishvili was a violent criminal with a history of multiple convictions, including 12 break-ins across Athens over the past 6 months. His crimes included violent robberies, one of which eerily resembled the method used in Caroline's murder. This led investigators to suspect him. In one incident in December, Haradishvili and his accomplices broke into a house through a rear window, dragging the female occupant by the hair and threatening to slit her throat. In another robbery on March 7th, they tied up multiple victims, including an elderly couple and a cleaning lady, stealing cash and valuables. Haradishvili's description closely matched a sketch based on Babis' account of the intruder, further fueling suspicions. Haradishvili was arrested and interrogated intensively over 4 days. Despite physical pressure, he denied any involvement, maintaining that he had never heard of Caroline Crouch. Eventually, the evidence against him proved insufficient. He was cleared of all charges, leading to the demotion of 3 officers from the Athens homicide squad. With Haradishvili eliminated as a suspect, the investigation shifted focus to a local Albanian organized crime group. Police initially compiled a list of 100 suspects, which was later narrowed to 10 individuals from the Red List, a registry of known criminals. Mugshots were shown to Babis, but no definitive progress was made. As the case dragged on, public frustration mounted. The lack of DNA, fingerprints, or any solid leads added to the mystery. Experts and media speculated that this was no ordinary crime. Even a substantial monetary reward failed to generate useful tips. Fear gripped Athens as residents worried about the possibility of becoming the next victims. Throughout this period, Babis maintained a public presence, actively engaging on social media and supporting the police's efforts. He repeatedly stated his hope that no one else would endure such a tragedy, using the media to keep Caroline's case in the spotlight. Caroline's family, meanwhile, expressed gratitude for the continued pursuit of justice. A breakthrough finally came on June 17th, 37 days after Caroline's murder. During a small memorial service for Caroline on Alonissos, detectives discreetly approached Babis. They requested that he accompany them to Athens, citing new developments in the case. Unaware of what lay ahead, Babis agreed. By this time, investigators had meticulously analyzed key details from the night of the murder. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, and the truth was closer than ever. The case of Caroline and Babis began as a tragic story of a supposed home invasion, but unraveled into a chilling narrative of manipulation, control, and betrayal. The initial details provided by Babis to the police raised numerous red flags. Babis claimed that intruders had broken into their home through a basement window. However, the window was too small for anyone of the physique he described. He also alleged that the house had been ransacked, yet neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual that night, only the distressed cries of the couple's puppy. There were no sounds of a struggle, no cries for help, and no crying infant. The house showed no evidence of fingerprints or DNA. Babis suggested that the intruders had removed the memory card from the living room security camera, but data from the camera revealed that the card had been removed at 1:20 a.m., hours before the alleged break-in. This discrepancy raised further doubts about his version of events. Caroline was wearing a smartwatch that monitored her vital signs. Data from the device revealed that she was asleep at 3:30 a.m. At 4:05 a.m., her pulse spiked, indicating severe physical and mental stress. By 4:11 a.m., her heart had stopped, well before the time Bobbish claimed the murder occurred. Meanwhile, data from Bobbish Fitness app showed he was moving around during the time he was supposedly tied up by the intruders. Additionally, police were unable to replicate his claim of dialing emergency services while bound. Further investigations uncovered more troubling details. Caroline had attempted to book a hotel room for herself and her daughter on the night she was killed. A text message to a friend revealed she was threatening to leave Bobbish. The couple's history painted a stark contrast to their social media facade. Bobbish, charismatic and financially stable, had wooed Caroline with grand gestures, including flying a helicopter over her school. They eloped when Caroline was still underage, marrying just 3 days after her 18th birthday. What seemed like a romantic escape was, in hindsight, an attempt to isolate her from her support system. Caroline's diary revealed the darker side of their relationship. Entries detailed fights, manipulative behavior, and her growing doubts. She described Bobbish as controlling, taking even the money her mother sent to support her. Despite her unhappiness, she felt trapped, especially after becoming pregnant. "I stayed with him so my daughter would not grow up without her two parents," she wrote. A July 2020 entry marked her breaking point. "Today my little one is a month old. It's also the day I told Bobbish I want to leave. I feel awful." As police pieced together the evidence, a different picture emerged. The supposed fairy tale romance had devolved into an abyss of control, despair, and eventual tragedy. Caroline's attempts to escape were thwarted by her circumstances and Bobbish's manipulative grip. The very man who promised her a dream life turned out to be the architect of her nightmare, one that would ultimately lead to her death. The cracks in Bobbish and Caroline's relationship were undeniable. Hours before her murder, phone records revealed argumentative and combative texts exchanged between them while they were at home. It was a chilling testament to the distance and dysfunction that had come to define their lives. Bobbish became the prime suspect in the case when investigators confronted him with overwhelming and irrefutable evidence that dismantled his earlier claims. The inconsistencies in his story became glaringly apparent. After an 8-hour interrogation, he finally broke down, but even then, his confession was riddled with fabrication. Bobbish claimed the arguments began on May 10th, the night before the murder. According to him, the couple's disputes were centered around their daughter. Caroline, he alleged, was determined to take the child and leave him. He described this as a devastating blow, insisting that the child was his whole life. Bobbish painted a picture of escalating tensions, claiming that Caroline had thrown the infant into the cot, ordered him to leave the house, and resorted to physical abuse by pushing and punching him. He said his judgment became clouded in the heat of the moment. He lashed out, strangling her and pressing a pillow against her face with his full body weight until she was dead. A cold-blooded murder committed in front of their 11-month-old child. After the murder, Bobbish confessed to deliberating over what to do with Caroline's body, but quickly abandoned the idea of disposing of it. Instead, he devised a plan to stage a home invasion. To make the scene convincing, he killed the family dog, Roxy, placed his infant daughter next to Caroline's corpse, and tied himself up with rope and duct tape to feign being a victim. In his confession, Bobbish expressed that he deserved punishment and owed an apology to everyone he had hurt. Yet, he attempted to shift blame onto Caroline, portraying himself as a man driven to instability and aggression after becoming a father. The truth, however, told a different story. Investigators found that Bobbish had become so confident in his ability to cover up the murder that he didn't bother destroying key evidence. His staged home invasion fell apart under scrutiny. In May 2022, Bobbish was charged and found guilty of premeditated murder, lying to authorities, obstructing justice, and animal abuse. The horrifying case earned the moniker, "The Murder That Fooled the World." Now, the couple's child is left to grow up without her mother, a mother whose life was brutally ended by the man she once loved. The tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the irreversible damage wrought by deception, violence, and betrayal.
This was today's true story. Our aim is for people to learn from such incidents and strive to improve society. Do let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.